Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. For those of you guys that are here today visiting for the first time and you hate the message, it's only today. Next week, you get to hear him speak on a regular basis. And so he's a great communicator, great speaker, great pastor, and also a great friend, as he mentioned. But I love to hear him speak. And so all speakers need a break. And so he's taking a break today, and I'm happy to help him out. I'm excited to be with you guys today. Today, as he mentioned, is a standalone message, which means it's a message only for today that doesn't tie into a series that carries on next week. But as we know, like many messages that are just for today, they don't just stay in our hearts for today. They carry on for the rest of the day, tomorrow, the day after. And so the topic for today is actually Detour. And the message, as you can imagine, is when life doesn't go the way you planned. And as you guys may or may not have noticed, there's some gigantic detour signs behind me. And I stole those to make the illustration a little stronger. I will return them after church because this is who we are. When we steal things, we give them back. No, I'm just kidding. We didn't steal them. I'm going to keep them. So we are, I'm diving into that message today, and what I want to do is I just want to help you understand that sometimes things don't go the way that you planned. And if you have been watching anything in 2020, I can promise you, you're going to be on page with me that 2020 has not gone the way that you had planned. If you had any goals or any dreams or any aspirations for 2020 quickly readjusted those for many of us. And so the reality is not before even 2020 happened, you had detours in your life that you didn't plan, unplanned events. And I know that a lot of us have had an experience with detours, and whether it's a simple detour sign on the road, it's never planned. It never comes at the right time. It never comes in a moment that you want it to. Not too long ago, my boys were playing that game out in Marietta, and we were coming home late at night. And as we were coming home late at night, it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm on the 15 freeway going towards the 91 to come home. And if you've ever been in the 9115 area, it is never fun to be in the 9115 area. But at 10 o'clock at night, it's like, hey, 10 o'clock at night, I think we're safe. I think we're good. We're going to be okay. Sure enough, coming down the 15 freeway and getting ready to get on the on-ramp to take me over the overpass to the 91 freeway, and guess what? It's closed. There's a detour. And I'm like, oh, gosh, this is terrible. So then we drive past the on-ramp, and then if you know anything about the 15 freeway, the next exit is Hidden Valley. And so then I get off on Hidden Valley, and then I go over the bridge, and I get back on the freeway so I can come from the other direction, so I can get on the on-ramp to get on the 91 West to come home. And guess what happens? It's closed. Another detour. And, at 10 o'clock at night, or now 10:15, 10:20, the things that are running through my head and my heart are not very loving, and are not very kind, or are not very friendly, or not things that my kids should be hearing. And so I'm ready to get home, and I'm having a hard time getting home. So luckily, I know the area, so I go to the next exit, I get off on Magnolia, I turn right, and I go through the neighborhood, and I make my way down Main Street, and I finally find an entrance to the 91 freeway where I can come home. Now, the reality is, detours are never really fun. They're not like, when I see a detour, it's like, oh man, this is going to be so great. I'm going to wander around the city of Corona, looking at new things, and at some point, I'm going to find my way home, and it's just going to be wonderful. I mean, none of us really do that, right? I mean, not too long ago for the 4th of July, I had a friend that I invited him over for dinner, and I was going to cook for him and his family, and I was out of propane. And so I'm like, oh, man. So I go across the street to where we live, and they were out of propane as well. And so I check a few liquor stores and a few grocery stores, and they were out of propane. So when my friend showed up, I said, hey, can you just leave your family here and take me to up the street because we're out of propane? He was just so angry. I mean, he was just so mad because I made him take a detour from the plans that were in his head. In his head, he was like, I'm going to park, I'm going to have a drink, I'm going to relax. And then he shows up, and I put him to work, and I take him to go get me propane. So he was angry, bitter the whole time. And I'm just like smiling and trying to carry a conversation. And he's just angry because of the detour that happened in his mind, right? So here's the reality. Detours are never, ever something that we look forward to. They're never, ever something that we're excited about. They're never, ever something that we plan, obviously. And this isn't new. This isn't new. Sometimes we run into funny detours. Sometimes we run into not so funny detours. Sometimes events happen in our life that we did not want to happen. And we're left with, what do we do with this unplanned event that happened. Now, there's a story that I want to read to you, and if you're new to the Bible, I'm going to have the scripture on the screens, and you can follow along. But this story is a story about a guy named Moses, not this Moses, an actual Christian Moses, a guy named Moses who was used by God to lead people who were enslaved in Egypt out of slavery. They call them the Israelites. And so people that were slaves in Egypt were crying out to God for help and for deliverance. We're in pain. We're in agony. We're working from sunup to sundown, beyond hours, where their workload was being increased. They were given less resources. They were being mistreated more and more every day. And so they were like crying out for help, crying out for deliverance, crying out for freedom, crying out to God to help them from what they were going through. So he brings this guy named Moses to free them from this Roman empire of Pharaoh who was oppressing them. And so Moses comes and he goes through these plagues and he goes through this whole process like, hey, God is asking you to free them. And Pharaoh's saying, no, I'm not freeing them. And so the plague number 1 comes, plague number 2 comes, it was kind of like 2020 all over again, but back then. And so then finally Pharaoh's like, you know what? I'm done with all these plagues. I'm done with all the frogs and the locusts and the blood in the Nile River and all this crazy stuff. Like, take them out of here. And so then Moses finally starts leading them out, and he's leading them out. You would think like, oh man, like these people are going to be super grateful for being, freed from this, right? And so as he's leading them out, like there's a couple of ways he could have gone to what they call the promised land, whereas they were going. They could have taken a short route, or they could have taken a long route. And God decided to take them the long route. Took them on a detour. And let me read you the story. Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 and 18, it says, when Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through the Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said, if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way throughout the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Thus the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. So here you see that God led the people of Israel, not in the shortest path, but in a roundabout way. Took them on a detour. And the reason why he did that is because if they would have come across a struggle, or if they would have come across a problem, or if they would have come across something that was not in their head, it would have been too easy for them to return back to slavery. It would have been too easy for them to go back to what they were accustomed to and what they were familiar with. And even though it was what they were wanting to be delivered from, God purposely took them away from that so that they wouldn't go back to that. So let me show you. On the screen, on the upper left-hand corner, there's what we call Lower Egypt. Now, to the far right is where they were trying to get to. That's called the Promised Land up there. What God decided to do was to take them down over the Red Sea, down to Mount Sinai, down into the wilderness, up, do a few laps in there, come back down to the bottom, make their way back up. Took them on the longest journey possible. Now, the reason why he did that is because of this. He wanted to deepen their faith. He wanted to deepen their trust. He wanted them to be rooted in a relationship with him. He didn't want them to just be off and on and hot and cold and I'm all about you, I'm not all about you, and I'm partly for you, I'm not partly for you. And he wanted to take them on a journey that was going to allow them to deepen and grow their relationship with God. Now, sometimes detours may be planned, and many times detours are not planned. But regardless if it's planned or not, a detour can always be used to draw you closer to God or to take you further from God. And so what I want to do today is I want to explain how this works and explain that although many of us have gone through some simple detours or some not so simple detours, that at the end of the day, we can choose what to do with that event that was either planned or unplanned. Like for myself, I have some innocent ones that they might have been very crushing to me, but, to you, you'd probably laugh. Like, for example, as a teenager, as a kid, I loved the sport of baseball. And I really thought, like, man, I'm going to play for the California Angels. I'm going to be the third baseman for them. My name's going to be up on that big, huge scoreboard, and I'm going to play for the California Angels. And as I got older and I became a teenager, I quickly realized that although the California Angels had a terrible record, they still had a high standard of really good players, and I wasn't one of them. And so that dream quickly had to be diminished because there was a standard that came with wanting to be a California Angel, and that's you having to be a good player, which I wasn't. So that was a quick detour that I had to quickly learn how to realize I got to let go of that because that's not going to happen. And so then after that, I said, okay, I went to college, and then I said, okay, what am I going to do? I want to, I love, obviously I love church, and I wanted to help in church, but I never, ever, ever thought I was going to make a career of church. I just thought I was always going to volunteer for church. So I chose something else that was going to allow me to be fulfilling people's lives, helping, directing, leading, guiding. So I chose to become an educator. And I went to school, got my degree, got my teaching credential, got my master's, became an educator. I'm off and running. I'm teaching, I'm volunteering for the church. Life is great. I'm moving forward. This is it. I got the rest of my life planned because it's pretty easy to plan out your career when it's all laid out for you. There's a pretty little chart, the years, the salary, what happens when you retire, what you do, how. It's all wonderful. Wonderful plans. I had some great plans. And then 6-7 years into teaching, God redirected my heart and wanted me to step away from teaching to pursue full-time ministry. Now, this was really confusing to me because I had spent a lot of money on my education. I had paid for it myself, and that's not cheap. And so I was just like, why would I leave teaching to go do full-time ministry? It doesn't make any sense. Why can't I just do what I'm doing now? I'm working as a teacher. I'm volunteering for the church 20, 30, 35 hours a week. Life was great. I was going to work at 7:15 a.m. I was off at 2:15. I had weekends off. I had 185 days off the year. I mean, it was awesome. And then God decided He wanted to do something different with my life. And so sure enough, I wrestled with God, and I lost that battle also, just like the California Angels third baseman position that I never got. And I lost that battle as well, and I walked away from being an educator. I stepped into the local church and started pursuing my life as ministry and had no idea where God was going to lead all this. Every year was a new adventure. Every season was something different. One thing built onto the other. Never did I ever imagine I'd be doing what I'm doing today, but here I am. All because of the detours in my life that I allowed God to use to help me draw closer to Him. Now, those detours I could have very, very easily used to go away from Him and say, no, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be a part of you. I'd rather just do my own thing and do my own life, and let me figure it out for myself. I could have done those things. But at the end of the day, that's not what God had planned. And I was committed to allowing God to fulfill His plans for my life. Because if there's one thing I've learned, is that if I want to experience the most joy and the most peace and the most love and the most purpose and the most direction for my life, it's listening to what God has planned for my life. That's how I can experience the greatest part of life, by allowing God to do with my life what He has planned for my life. And the journey for me is the wilderness. When seems like a dotted line to Him, it's Him taking me through these experiences and these stories and this journey to help me to draw closer to Him. Now, those are the simple ones. Those are oh, that doesn't seem so bad. Like, it doesn't seem like as tragic as you made it sound. But sometimes we come across some unplanned detours that are painful. Like, for example, a mom who ultimately created her identity in being a mom to her kids. The kids grow up, they're off on their own, they're gone to college, married, kids, and now the mom is left with, wait, I was a mom, this was my identity, that's changed, what do I do now? Or another event, possibly, where a career you pursued and a business you put all your savings into and all your heart and energy, and then a quarantine comes, and all of a sudden your business is no longer a business, and now you're left with, now what? Or a more tragic situation might have happened to you where you lost a loved one, a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, a child, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're left with, I never saw this coming. What do I do with the pain, the confusion, the agony, what do I do? What's left that's going on in my heart? And those are detours that I can say are not fun, are not exciting, but at the end of the day, because we're a part of a broken world, we go through these experiences that we never saw coming and that were unplanned. And then there's two major things that unplanned detours do for us. There's two major ways that unplanned detours, these moments affect us in a negative way. And what I want to make sure is that you're clear. A negative detour, a moment that can be very hard and painful in your life, they can do one of two things. And here's number one. They can distance us from God and others. And if you're taking notes, feel free to write that down. Or if you're at home, you want to write that down on your donut and coffee, if you can write that down there as well. They can distance us from God and others. And the second thing, an unplanned detour that can affect us in a negative way, what it can do is also distract us from our God-focused priorities. They can distract us from our God-focused priorities. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the story of Moses, God purposely took them on this long journey because he wanted to deepen their faith. Because he knew that if they were to come across an issue or a struggle, that they were going to want to return to what was comfortable to them. And to them, what was comfortable and familiar was slavery, was being mistreated, was the pain that they were originally trying to get from. And so I want to read the scripture now, and I'm going to fast forward in the story. Exodus chapter 14, verse 10 through 14, it says, "As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked." So Pharaoh is the one that originally released them. Moses took them, and led them on the journey. Pharaoh then regrets letting them go. So he goes back he wants to bring them back. And as Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked and panicked. When they saw the Egyptians overtaking them, they cried out to the Lord and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." Now let me just hit time out for a second. And I just want to reverse where that was at chapter 14. And let me take you back to chapter 2. This is the same exact people who were crying out to God saying, I'm tired of being a slave. I'm tired of being mistreated. I'm tired of going through this pain. I'm tired of going through this agony. Deliver us. Get us out of here. Get us out of here, right? And now they're complaining of why did you bring us out here? What are you thinking? I told you this was going to happen. So let me go backtrack to chapter 2, verse 23. It says, "Years later, the king of Egypt died. But the Israelites were still groaning under their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry went up to God." So this is them saying, "God, help." God helps them, takes them on the journey. They come across a struggle, and their first reaction is, "God, what are you doing to us? Why did you bring us out here? Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt like we said all along?" And then Moses, in a very calm, loving way, I feel like I relate so much to Moses in so many different ways. I just imagine this is his tone of voice as he's listening to his people cry, complain, make noises that of whining and nagging. I just imagine Moses being, and this is what it says in the Bible, and I'm just going to read it as I imagine it because, I feel like there's familiarity there. But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you." In a very loving, kind voice. It says, "The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." And this is what I imagine it looking at, because this is what it sounds like in my home when I'm reprimanding my kids. And they're nagging and they're yelling and they're screaming. And I just, that's the kind of voice that I use when I correct them. And so this is Moses saying, "Hey, listen, relax. God is taking you on a journey. And whenever you go on a journey with God, it's never going to be for the worse. Whenever you decide to go on a journey with God, it's not going to be a journey where you're going to hate, regret, feel pain and torture and punishment, and you're gonna say my life was better then." What Moses is teaching them right here is saying, hey, you were hating life. God took you out of that. And you're on a journey with God now. And although it's still not easy, and there's still some struggles, and there's still some detours in this process, you're going to be okay because you're with God. Your life is always going to be better with God than it is going to be better on your own. You're always going to experience depth and purpose and joy and love and grace with God than what you're going to experience on your own. So this is Moses saying, hey, listen, God is with you. God is going to rescue you. God has you. And so if there's one thing that I want you to remember from today's message, and if there's only one thing that you remember, I want you to remember this. God is never content with part of you. God is never content with part of you. There's a theologian, a professor, a speaker, an author. His name is Sinclair Ferguson, and he had a lot of great messages, a lot of great books, some really deep thoughts. And there was a quote that he said that really resonated with my heart to help me understand the depth of where God wants us to be. And the quote is this: God is never satisfied with anything less than the devotion of our whole life for the whole duration of our lives. God is never satisfied with anything less than the devotion of our whole life for our whole duration of our lives. He never really wants to see less. He's never going to be okay with us giving him part of our heart, part of our life, part of our mind. It's never going to be enough for you, and it's never going to be enough for him. The journey with God is complete arrival of trusting and having faith and believing that the life with God is going to be greater than any life you can possibly create on your own. And this is also, there's moments in the Bible where these people were confused and they were wondering like what should they listen to and what's going on. And I'm hearing a lot of different stories and I'm hearing a lot of different rules and laws. And there's a story in the book of Mark chapter 12 where Jesus was doing some teaching. And by this time, this has been many, many, many years after Moses' time when Jesus was actually walking around doing teaching, there was people who came to him and they were like, hey, listen, back when Moses was on this journey, he came up with these 10 commandments. And as time went on, religious leaders and Pharisees and prophets, they added more to these commandments that were so simple at the very beginning. But they went from 10 to 15 to 18 to 30 to 100 to 200, 400, 600. And then by the time they got to this moment where Jesus was walking with them teaching, there were 613 rules and laws. And so people were confused. They didn't know what to listen to. One rule contradicted another, and one law contradicted the other. And so they're having a conversation of like, what do we do? What do we listen to? Have you ever been in that moment? Does that sound familiar to anybody right now? Where you watch one news channel, and then you turn on the other news channel, read one article, and then you read another article. And you hear one story, and then you hear another story, and it's like, who is right? Who is right? Who is wrong? What do I listen to? What do I not listen to? This contradicts this. This professor says one thing. This professor says another thing. This governor says one thing. This governor says another. Federal says this. State says this. Mayor says this. The CDC says this. And it's just like, who's got the information? This is what people were feeling in this time right now with a relationship with God. They're saying, which law do we listen to? And so Jesus says, you know what? I know there's a lot of information going around right now. Let me simplify this. Let me make this really easy for you. Mark chapter 12 says, one of the teachers of the law of Moses came up while Jesus and the Sadducees were arguing. When he heard Jesus give a good answer, he asked him, what is the most important commandment? The people just want to know, like, man, 613 laws, that's a lot. Just which one's the most important one? I can't do 613. Just give me one. Give me two. But 613, that confuses me. I'm never going to arrive there. Help me. This is what Jesus says. Jesus answered, the most important one says, people of Israel, you have only one Lord and God. You must love him with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, and all of your strength. So here Jesus is saying, listen, forget about the 613. Let me just simplify this real quick. There's one God. He's your focus. And what you need to do with God is love him with all of your heart, with all of your mind, all of your strength, that's the most important thing. And so let me break this down. I want you to grasp the depth of what it means to love God with all of your heart. And to love God with all your heart, here's what that means. To find in God a satisfaction so profound that it fills up all your heart. Find in God a satisfaction so profound that it fills up all of your heart. That's what it means to love God with all of your heart. And here's what it means to love God with all of your soul. To find in God a meaning so rich and so deep that it fills up all of the aching corners of your soul. To find in God a meaning so rich and so deep that it fills up all of the aching corners of your soul. And to love God with all of your mind means this: to find in God the riches of knowledge and insight and wisdom that guide and satisfy all the human mind was meant to be. Now, as I started this message, I started it with trying to help us understand that detours are going to be a part of our life. Whether they're planned or unplanned, they're going to be a part of your life. And the longer you live life, the more detours you're going to come across. And the longer you live life, the more unplanned detours you're going to come across. And the detours can serve one of two things: draw you closer to God or push you away from God. Draw you closer to people or push you away from people. And I'll say this: God has nothing more but to want to have you come closer to him. But as much as God wants you to have you come closer to him, there's an enemy working behind the scenes that wants nothing more than to push you away from God. And the detours that happen in our life, we can choose to draw closer to God, or we can choose to draw further from God. We can choose to draw closer to those around us, or we can choose to draw closer to those around us. In God's heart, his desire is for you to be in a relationship with him and a relationship with others. And the enemy's heart and desire is for you to be pushed away from him and to be pushed away from others. And there's a story that I want to read that I'm going to have my sister read. And the reason why I'm going to have her share this story is because this is an unplanned detour that happened in my older sister's life. My parents have 6 kids. There's two boys and 4 girls. I have an older brother, an older sister. Her name is Sonia. Myself, I'm the 3rd child. Then I have 3 sisters below me. And my older sister had an event that happened in her life that was absolutely unplanned and absolutely excruciating painful. It was hurtful not only to her and her family, but hurtful to all of us. And she's not here this weekend, but I asked for her permission to share her story. And rather than me sharing the story, I'm actually going to have my younger sister come up and share her story so that you can hear the detour that happened in her life and what came from it.
So I'll be sharing this story on behalf of our sister, Sonia. I remember feeling sick one morning, thinking I had eaten something bad, and it hadn't settled with me. After a week or so of feeling sick, I took a home pregnancy test, and it tested positive. I was okay with the results because we had talked about having another baby and thought, okay, here we go again. At about 12 weeks into my pregnancy, I had my first ultrasound, and as I'm laying there on the ultrasound table, when the assistant asks, do twins run in your family? I looked at her and said, why are you asking? She smiled and said, I'll be right back. When the specialist came in, he confirmed what they had already seen in my ultrasound, and then the doctor said, Mrs. Broughton, you are having twins. I said nothing. I just stared at the doctor, and I remember him asking, are you okay? I was okay, but I was shocked because twins don't actually run in our family. And after that doctor's appointment, I remember driving to my husband's shop and telling him the news. For me, it had already sunk in. I had already asked the doctor a million questions, heard the baby's heartbeats, and was so excited at the thought of having twins. Aaron, not so much. The news of having, he did not like the news he didn't take the news of having twins as well as I did. It took him a couple days to process the thought of, wow, I can't believe we're having twins. Everything changed from that moment. We found out we were having twins. We needed a bigger car, a double stroller, 2 car seats, 2 of everything was all he could think. The next big moment was at 16 weeks of my pregnancy, when we were going to find out the sex of our babies. Aaron hadn't usually come to appointments with me, but this one he did not want to miss. He had been praying that it was a boy. At this point, we knew the twins were not identical, and the nurse looked at me and said, "Congratulations, you're having 2 baby girls coming your way." I was ecstatic as I thought of all the matching outfits my little girls would wear, and I looked at Aaron and I saw his face, definitely not as happy as I was, and I knew it was because he wanted a boy and we had not planned on having any more kids. I had already signed the paperwork to have my tubes tied immediately after having the babies. Throughout the pregnancy, we prepared our lives and our homes for the arrival of our girls. Picking names was such a process. In the last trimester, we both agreed Emma and Ella. Twin A was Emma and twin B was Ella. I knew exactly where they were located inside of me. I named them before even meeting them. I knew I wanted twin A to be Emma. She was super active, and she moved, and she kicked. She felt like she was having a dance party every time I talked directly to her. Twin B was more calm. She moved the most when I played the music she loved, and I named her Ella. I imagined their personalities before I even met them. After what felt like an eternity of a pregnancy, I remember being so excited on the day I was finally going to meet my 2 twin little girls. I wondered what they were going to look like, me or my husband. Was I going to have 3 little white girls or maybe get one that looked like me? Then in what seemed like a flash, my emotions went from excitement to scared and confused. The room filled with doctors and nurses, and the only phrase that was in my head was from my baby's pediatrician and said, "Mrs. Broughton, as soon as you have the baby, I'm going to do everything in my power to bring her back." By this time, they had already told me we had lost her heartbeat for twin A, which for me was Emma. It all happened so fast, and the next moment, I was laying in the recovery room, a nurse by my side, holding my hand, and I looked at her, scared to what the answer would be to my question. I turned around and asked, "Did she make it?" With her tears in her eyes, she squeezed my hand and shook her head, "No." I felt defeated, angry, sad, an overwhelming feeling of anxiety, all while I laid there not being able to move, but everything inside of me wanting to get up and run. I carried the grief of Emma's death for years, ignoring the entire chapter of her existence. I made myself busy, and I didn't allow myself to accept what I had gone through. It was a mix of emotions between sadness and anger, but I refused to express deep down I was dying. I was mad at the world, and I was mad at God. I couldn't bring myself to accept why God would allow me to carry my child full term, only to take her away minutes before meeting her. I distanced myself from God and from anyone who wanted to give me a spiritual reason for what had happened. I remember taking a class at church, and the class was Empty Arms, directed to parents who had lost a child. This class helped me accept and voice all of my feelings I had been ignoring and pushing deep down in my heart. I remember reading a phrase from our class homework that said, "Following God, believing in God, or having faith in God is not an insurance that nothing bad will ever happen to you." That phrase stuck with me, and I realized that God is not against me, but he is for me. And when I look back, I see how God placed the most loving people in our life at that time, our growth group, our friends and family that took care of us when we couldn't think straight. He provided all the comfort that our hearts needed at the time. I have learned to depend on God to get me through my life storms. I learned that I am not in control of the detours in our life. And I made a promise to myself that no matter what happens in my life, I will trust God, that he is with me, he is for me, and ultimately he is the healer of my heart.
that round of applause. Thank you, Ez, for coming and sharing that story. I definitely would rather have had you read it than myself. I remember that day like as if it was yesterday. I was actually in a meeting upstairs at our church office when I was in Corona, and when it happened, they came running and telling us like, "Hey, your sister's in the hospital, and that things are not going well with the babies." So obviously we rushed out and ran to the hospital, and I just remember like my brother-in-law Aaron just broken, absolutely just crushed. And I couldn't see my sister because she was like obviously under care, and so my brother-in-law came out and he just couldn't put any words on, and he's just in tears, and he's just like holding on to me, and he's just like holding tight. And I just remember just like not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. There was really nothing to say, nothing to do, and all we can do is just sit there and hold each other and cry. And although this was a detour and a tragic, unplanned event that happened to them, it affected us all. And so sure enough, it obviously, as my sister read, like she was angry. She was angry at God. She was angry at anyone that was trying to comfort her with words of like, oh, it was planned and it's going to be okay and you're going to be stronger for this. And she didn't want to hear any of that. And I understand. She needed to heal. She needed to hurt. But at the end of the day, God allowed her to get stronger from this. Did God plan this? Absolutely not. This was not God's plan. This was a result of a broken world. And when we live in a broken world, unfortunately, broken things happen. And there's a scripture that I want to read to you, and it says how God can use brokenness and bring good out of it. But it doesn't mean that God creates the brokenness. The brokenness is already a part of this world because sin entered into this world. We live in a broken world. And in a broken world, sad, hurtful, painful things happen. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says, we know that in all things God works for good with those who love him. And what he's saying here is that not all things are good. That was not a good event. But because we're on this long journey with God, he can make us stronger through this. And he can deepen our faith and our trust. And we can find hope and joy and peace even when the world really wants to hurt us and put us in a place of pain and of loneliness and of depression and isolation. God is wanting to protect us from what the world is trying to create in us. And I want to close with one statement. And I want this statement just to resonate in your head and heart as you go about the rest of your day and the rest of your week today. It says, you will be changed by what happens to you, but you don't have to be reduced by it. Unplanned events will change you. There's no doubt about it. But you don't have to let them change you in a negative way. You don't have to let them reduce your life, reduce your heart, reduce your goals, reduce your dream, reduce your passion, reduce your purpose. You don't have to let them reduce you. Through the journey with God, you can allow those things to strengthen you and draw closer to God and draw closer to others. Go ahead and bow your heads as I pray for you.